ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Well, hello there, and welcome back to yet another tutorial video where we are going to learn more about FileMaker Pro. My name is Matt Petrowski, bringing you these tutorials from my website, FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video tutorial, we are taking a look at good script writing. Is there a better, best? What are the things that you should know about writing scripts? Well, that's what we're going to take a look at in this video. Alrighty, thanks for joining me here on my desktop, and what we have in front of us is what I consider to be one of the better ways to write your scripts in terms of how you want to break things down, as well as making readable code. Now, I'm not going to head right into this script. What we're going to do just before we step through this and I talk about all of the individual parts of this script, and this is just the top part of the script. As you can see down here at the bottom, that's where my main script actually starts, but up at the top, we've actually got our parameters and defaults. Now, I'm going to be telling you what fundamentally you should be thinking of when you start to compose your scripts as we go throughout the course of this video. But before that, I wanted to go through and look at some of the other code that's written by well-respected companies and developers and see what we can beg, borrow, and steal from them, sort of talk about some of the background and go through some differences that allows you to compare and find out what method you'd like to use when you're going to write your scripts. Hey there, this is Matt. Thanks for taking the time to watch my free videos on YouTube. This video has been sponsored by what we see on screen right here. Now, if you are looking for hosting, there's a ton of places that you can choose from, but I choose to go with fmcloud.fm, and I'll tell you why. They use the latest technology. Now, I haven't worked with other providers. They may be using the same technology, but I know the owner of fmcloud.fm, Fabrice Nordman. I trust him. I know he knows what he's talking about because his understanding of technology is absolutely solid. Now, these guys are using container-based technology. So every instance of your FileMaker server is completely isolated from another server. How does this benefit you? Well, because of that situation, they're able to provide all of the features, the full features of your FileMaker server. Now, if you go with some of the other providers, you may not have features that you would like to have, such as the ability to run your own plugins. And because each of these containers are isolated from each other, you really have a robust security setup. Now, if we take a look right here, just like any other provider, you can choose from all kinds of different places, anywhere across the globe that you might want to host your FileMaker database system so that your latency is low and all of your clients are connecting really close to your FileMaker server. So if you're looking to set up your own FileMaker server or maybe migrate from another provider, then take a look at the link that I have in the description or on the video or on screen right now at FileMakerMagazine.com/hosting, and we'll redirect you to fmcloud.fm where you'll be able to take advantage of their great offers. All right, so to start off, what I wanted to do is go through some example files provided by some other well-respected consultancies. That always gives you a good sense of what are other people doing versus what am I doing? Are there better ways that I could do things? And this is something that I like to do for myself. You obviously pick up tips and tricks over the course of time, but what we're going to do as I zoom into the window menu here, I've got a number of files. The technique file is something that's the script that I just showed you that I'm going to be going through at the end of this or towards the end of this video. So you can grab the scrubber if you want to go right towards the end. But if you want to stick around, we're going to be taking a look at some other files. Now, this BZ Bond is from a consultancy called Beeswax. They do a lot of stuff, including stuff specifically for Apple, I'm aware of. Punisher is a file that's coming from another well-respected consultancy called Soliant Consulting, created by a very, very talented developer, Wim DeCourt. CRM Solution. This is actually something that I worked on with a consultancy known as iSolutions by Chris Ippolite, and we'll take a look at some of their scripts that they have. Wheatbix, Daniel, constantly releasing really good content. And then finally we have Generator, which originally was created by Todd Geist, but maybe worked on by other developers as well. Now, the interesting thing is, over the course of time, script writing has changed within FileMaker. as we've acquired new tools, one of them most importantly being JSON in terms of how we handle and pass multiple parameters. So that's what we're going to be seeing in the ultimate resolution of what I consider to be writing a good script. But I wanted to go through each of these different files and sort of just skim through and take a look at how and what developers doing, compare and contrast them between each of them, and then actually just go through that last and final script. All right, so starting with BZ Bond, and it just happens to be in alphabetical order, we are not critiquing or looking at the UI. All of these tools are used for a variety of different things. This is for interacting with the web viewer via, I believe, remote calls of being able to do that, but we're taking a look at the scripts. So as I bring up the scripts, one of the things that you're going to see me do, and this is also a technique that I'd like you to know about, this particular solution doesn't have a whole lot. In fact, we'll do it in the next solution. But essentially, if you want to see how a script has been written, you can go into the script workspace, which is obviously accessible up there in the menu. Script workspace, scripts, there it is. I actually just use the command key for getting into the script workspace, so I don't even know which menu it is many times. But the point being, folders, you can select into this area over here of the script workspace, click anywhere that's not a folder, do a command or control A, select everything, and then there is the ability to expand all folders. In fact, I really need to switch to another file. Let's take a look at Punisher. Just bring up its script workspace, and I will click here. I just clicked right in this area, select all, and I will collapse that. This seems to be a pretty flat file where everything is all in its let's see if Generator has a different script setup. I believe it's got, there we go. So this is actually my preferred method of organizing scripts, is to use a lot of folders with subfolders, because it allows you to collapse and expand everything. And this is just a trick that allows you to, say, for example, click in this area right here, do a command or control A, which I just did. Now I'm going to use the option key on the Mac, it may be Alt on Windows, and I'm going to use the right or the left arrows in order to expand everything. With everything expanded, I can now select on one script in this portion of the script workspace and use my down arrow to simply cycle through, just doing a visual check, looking at all of the different things that that particular script writer does. Now, first caveat, as I close these windows and we go back to BZ Bond, a company will have preferred methods of scripting. They will either implement a rigid policy, or they will allow their developers to develop their scripts individually. Our whole objective with good script writing is to make sure that things are easily understood. Now, the fundamental premise of all code is to make code itself readable and then supplement that code with good documentation. Now, good documentation doesn't mean you have to have a whole lot of documentation, but at least enough that you can make sense of what the logic of the script is doing many months down the road, or even years down the road. So as we select on the first script here, and we start to cycle, we can see that this particular developer, I believe it's Alex is his name, he prefers more of a minimalistic approach. In fact, he is not actually even indicating on his comments what that particular comment refers to. Now, what we're going to see in some of the other scripts is we're going to see a lot more content called a doc block. And in fact, let me switch over to the technique file. So this technique file, the shell that I have here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select on this first item right here. Now, this is what I used to use probably back 2010, 2012. I was working in Drupal at the time, and a doc block was how you would define or identify what a particular function did within code. And then you would have an automated process which would walk across all of your code files, and these are text files or whatever the language is, PHP, Python, etc. It would, because of the standard format called of a doc block, or I forget what it actually is called now, believe there's a different name, but it basically would pull information out. So for example, and we will see this in Wim's file, I believe he is using a doc block method. In fact, let's go ahead and just switch over. There's no harm in us switching to all these different files. Let's go to Punisher, and we'll go to the scripts and look at it. So there we go. This is a different type of doc block, but you can see right here that he's starting it with the @ symbol, @param, @return. This is a very common convention in a lot of other programming languages, and it's been adopted here within the context of FileMaker comments or script comments. Now, as I move this off to the side, note that what we have, and we're going to see one other example here. You're always going to see different variations on this. The equal sign as opposed to the dash, and then in some files, what you will see is this right here, the hash mark. Now, the weight of those becomes very obvious on screen, and if you're going to use dividers, there's many different ways that you can use dividers. In fact, I'll show you one of my more favorite in conjunction with whitespace when it comes to writing a good script. But the weight or the heaviness of these, you really need to sort of use them creatively and effectively. And one of the things that I would prefer is if you're going to do a heavy doc block up at the top, and then intra-script, meaning within your script, you're going to do callouts of sections, subsections, or just headers on a, let's say, a header of a loop portion of your script, then I prefer to use the dashes. And so I would reserve the really heavy for the documentation up at the top of the script, or a very heavily distinguished section divider within a very long, complex script. So just make note of that as we take a look at some of these other examples here. But switching back to BZ Bond, let's see if we can learn anything else from this particular script. One of the things that I note, one of the things that I tend to be doing is using whitespace itself, especially in conjunction with syntax highlighting. And if you're not familiar with what I have here on screen, because your copy of FileMaker does not look the same, I am using a copy of the MBS plugin, which you can use for free, but there's also a paid version, in order to color this text that we have in this script editor. And I'll let you go find that video either on the magazine website over at FileMaker Magazine, or there is also free videos about the MBS plugin that I have here on YouTube. But one of the things that I'm now doing is you really need to take advantage of whitespace. And if you do it in conjunction with syntax highlighting for yourself, granted that the syntax highlighting won't be the same for another developer unless you share your syntax highlighting, but adding spaces on things really starts to increase the readability of your scripts, as we will see in some of these other examples in terms of what's going on. And so I won't save that script. We'll go ahead and not save that for right now. But as we walk through that, let's see if we pick up anything else that we have here on screen. So in many regards, your scripts can be as clean as we have here from Alex on screen. When you have a shorter script, in this case 21 steps, do you really need a doc block on every single one of your scripts? My argument would be no. My argument is such that it became a bit more of a hassle to include a doc block, that really heavy item on the top of every script, that it was superfluous to the whole of my solution when I had a lot of simple running scripts where what I basically needed was just a purpose, and then the remainder of the code would actually describe what the script did. Now, the evolution to that was if there was a return result, then I wanted to document what the return result was. If there were inbound parameters, I stopped using a comment for the inbound parameters and allowing the code to speak for itself, which is what we're going to see towards the end of this video when we go through the final script. That's because I ended up I was finding out that I had to modify the documentation or the name of the parameter in two places. Why give myself extra work? So we're going to take a look at that. So let's cycle through a few others here. It looks like it's just a pretty standard method. This is a very simple solution. I would presume he knew he was developing this as a tool. It did not need a lot of heavily applied structure because this is not a super complex solution. It's a one-trick pony developed within FileMaker. So please do not use this as a reflection of all code that's created by Beeswax. This just happens to be one tool by Alex, provided by Beeswax, but that's pretty straightforward. And in most cases, this is absolutely fine as long as your comments and your code is readable. Also note that what we're going to see across these solutions are different preferences. Here we can see that the underscore is used as a preference for locally scoped variables, and that may be the case for for global variables. Yes, there's a global variable right there. I do like that they have adopted, this is something I don't know if I was the first to come up with this, but over at FileMakerStandards.com, one of the things I did back in 2010 was I wanted to clearly and visually identify a locally scoped variable, which in this case we can see is different in terms of the syntax highlighting that I have with the MBS plugin, from a globally scoped. And so I just decided that anything that I saw uppercase preceded by $2 was going to be a globally scoped variable. Well, I carried that theme into the fields, and any global field also became an all uppercase value in the solutions that I designed or developed in FileMaker. So let's move on to another solution. We'll close up BZ Bond. We are here, we're in Punisher. So let's take a look at that and we'll cycle through. So let's take a look. Let's see how consistent. Pretty consistent. So if I had to guess, Wim is definitely a developer, as I cycle through these scripts, who is very fond of simply using the same consistent doc block up at the top. There is no cost to doing this. In fact, you can use, if you are willing to, an automated process that can extract all of this documentation, because FileMaker did acquire a new feature and functionality of saving a copy of a FileMaker database as XML. Now, XML can be parsed. So what we get is we get the benefit that if you want documentation of all of your scripts and you do follow a strict standard where you're using things like the @param and the @return, I don't know where he would, they would be able to pull the name from the actual name of the script. But if he put @purpose, @dependencies, anything that could be a pattern that could be recognized out of the XML, you could automate the documentation process of a FileMaker database, making it easier for other developers to be able to use, because you could pull that documentation into yet another FileMaker database, which would basically be your docs about that particular solution. Really, you need to justify going down that path, but knowing that it's possible that any script exported as XML can be extracted and ripped across, that's a good thing to know. But we have a nice little balance right here where these are not super heavy, they're not using the hash, and then he does have these divider lines, which I'm not as fond of myself personally, but maybe they serve a purpose, and it's a preference. It's Wim's preferred style. Now, I do like in here that the use of whitespace is really good. One of the things that I am doing myself is a loop. I will set that out with regards to whitespace. So my loops will be isolated, wherein when you see the loop, there will be spaces above and below. And in this case, he's got an embedded loop, so that might even dictate right there. I want to be able to visually see that versus visually seeing this. And that is a really big help. You basically just set these standards for yourself. If I'm going to write a loop, I'm going to have them spaced. Key point, if you don't know this, in the FileMaker workspace, if you hit a simple return, it adds a new line after the current line that you have selected. If you hold the Shift key and hit the return, it will add a new space above. So that's really helpful as you're cycling up and down with the up and down arrow keys, and you decide you see the loop and you want a step above it, you just hold that Shift key, the return, and it will add the line above the loop. So a good thing to note there. Let's go ahead and close that, not save that script here, and not save that script, and just cycle through some of these and see if we can pick up any other tips about Wim's particular style of scripting here. Again, we've got a Punisher smaller, a reference to another FileMaker file, which we will just not take a look at, and because I don't have it downloaded. here actually is interesting. We can see right here, and this will happen. There will be developers that they will integrate code from other sources, and as we select between these two scripts, we can see right here we have gotten into a script that's from another developer. Now, this is an interesting thing. Many times what developers will do is they will make a dedicated folder of outbound code coming in. We're going to see this in the generator file of how they actually organize and structure their scripts. We took a look at it earlier, but I'll explain it when we get to that point. But here we can see that this is actually a block comment format. And what I mean by a block format is, if you're not familiar with it, I'll add a comment in here and I'll add a block comment, is basically this. A block comment, if you're not aware, is the slash with the star followed by a star with the slash, and everything in between those 2 points is considered a comment. Now, what Mr. Watson is doing here within Wim's Punisher file is he is using the same format here, but he has chosen to use a slash double hash and then a double hash slash. Now, whether that provides something for his solutions or not, it really depends on whether he's actually parsing the contents of a script, as I mentioned, using XML. He is using the @ symbol in terms of his code right here. So again, as long as it's readable, I have no arguments against it. I have myself personally switched away from this of always including a block, and I'll show you why. And it's mostly because I'm not using any automated processing in order to parse the contents of my solution in order to generate automated documentation. If you really have no plans of that, you are always going to be able to search your scripts or the whole of your content. In fact, if you don't know this, since I already showed it to you, going up to the tools, if I was to save a copy of this database as XML, I can go open that XML in another text editor. I happen to prefer Vim. It will open up multi-gigabyte files and be able to search them extremely fast. VS Code can probably do it as well, even though it's a JS editor. BBEdit, historically on the Macintosh, is also able to open really massive files if your XML is super large. But if you need to find something that you can't, and of course, there are tools as well. My preferred favorite tool is FM Perception, also provided by Geist and created by Dave Ramsey. So finding things when you need to across a range of scripts and you aren't familiar, completely doable in terms of finding things. And it's just a matter of how comfortable you are with searching within a particular editor. Let's just take a look at a few more in here and see if we can gather anything else. Looks like it's pretty standard. Now, that is an interesting thing right there that we've come across. I don't know that I'm a big fan of when you get to the point where you need multiple comments in your script. One of the things that I'm finding that I much prefer over this particular method, which this is fine, but it really depends on, sometimes you'll have developers and they are using a super long screen. And so the edge out here, they'll go and they've got like this massive long monitor. I'm doing most of my development actually on 1024. So you have to remember, if you use a point where you cut off your scripts, let's say, for example, he wanted to end right here, where you would basically take the remainder of this content off. All I did is duplicate that line and then do this. You can attempt to consolidate. You can see that right there, he's using a space in order to indent off of the hash value. That is something that you can do. I tend to, if you were going to do this, I like to make them fit within a specific fixed area, everything that I'm highlighting right there, rather than going really ragged like we have right here. This is a very complex thing to read. So the alternate to this, and I'm going to use a little trick that I have right here, this comment, watch this. This is a great thing about the MBS plugin as well. with all of these selected, the MBS plugin allows me to right-click and choose this option of copy selection. Notice it says MBS plugin right there. If I copy the selection of all of this comment code, I'm going to consolidate it down into one particular step, and I'm going to put in an insert text. Now, insert text is for the use of FileMaker, but nothing says that I have to specify a target. And when I specify the text and paste all of that comment in, I, of course, would be able to get rid of the hash in a text editor, what have you. But with this set, I can disable this and then simply put a comment right here and say extended comment about, and then, whatever it is that you want to. So what this does is it consolidates all of this code down into one line, where really the only time that I might need to reference that one line is if I'm having to re-decipher what that script does. In order for me to do that, all I have to do here is double click, and I'm now in a dialog that allows me to read this content. So that would be my preferred method over what we see on screen right here with multiple lines, and that's just because this is a little bit more of a hassle to deal with. Also note that if you need to move all of these at one time, you can of course select the first line of comment, select the second or the trailing line while holding down the shift key, and it will select everything in between. You of course can drag this with your mouse, but note that in the script workspace, you can also move this by using the control key with up and down arrows. So note that I can move this whole block, and that's what I'm doing with the key that I have right there in order to get that where and how I want it. All right, so I think Punisher has given us some really good things to learn from. I'm going to presume that most of the rest of these are pretty much going to be roughly the same. Usually a developer stays pretty consistent. Those are a lot of empty scripts there. In terms of doing things. And it was good to have Mr. Watson's mixed in there, and I was able to draw attention to his as well. But pretty much standard right there. All right, closing Punisher. Let's head over to Generator. So Generator is a tool that was designed in order to generate JSON for API calls whenever you're going to call out to an extra service. Now I'm going to click over here, select all, use the Option key and the backwards arrow in order to collapse everything so that we can talk about the structure here. When we look at the structure, this is something that Todd started using, and he was emulating off of other languages, which have always done this with what's known as private and public. This comes into the realm of object-oriented programming, where you would write a class. That class would have a number of things that it would do, usually specific to one area of a solution, and you would have things coming in, and it would spit things going out. Within that class where things happen, there are private functions, which means they're not exposed outside of the class. If outside in the rest of your code, you're saying, let's say there's the example of sending an email, you would declare a new object of mailer. That mailer would then load and use the mailer class, and the mailer class within it has private values and public values. FileMaker does not have that concept. So while it is applied here, you can see public, and let's see if there's something in here. There we go, right there. So we have a public, and I don't know why we have a private too, but we also have a test. This is very much a conventional setup in the rest of the programming world that FileMaker does not have, that's actually being applied here. In other words, everything that's here in private, while it would be considered private, it's basically it's a level of respect. You basically respect that you're not going to go in and change this script. But alas, it's FileMaker. You can change and modify any script that you want. You would just basically be changing and modifying this to your benefit or detriment, depending on how comfortable you are. We can actually see that this is actually created by Charles Delphs, a very talented programmer who has a tool called Better FM Forms, I believe, where they use PHP in order to communicate with FileMaker systems to have much better flowing web-facing forms. Here we can see that Charles prefers the heavy dash. He also has spaces, but I think what we're going to find is there is a commonality that we're going to note once I get to the end result that we're ending up at. And if you don't already know it on screen, I've got it selected. Purpose. The purpose is the one thing that you find at the beginning of most every script. We saw it with Alex and we saw it with the BZ Bond, just a single line comment, but he did not actually identify what that comment was by using the label of purpose. And as a matter of ego, for those of us that are developers, we almost always put our author. We're proud of our work. Many times we will have emails, etc. But in this, we've got a lot of structure, but we'll just expand this. Command A, Option key, and we'll just cycle through some of the scripts here. For example, base camps. So there is a utility script, I would have to presume, because it's all lowercase. Actually, they're using all lowercase in order to identify their trigger scripts. They're using a prefix of a trigger. It looks like some of Todd's earlier code. And make note, in this video, developers change the style of their code over time. And so I imagine Todd has evolved his code too. There's Chiyoko. I work with Chiyoko, and I happen to know that this is not necessarily her style, but she was following what was used in this particular file. If this was the style of commenting, then she probably followed that within here. Let's take a look at some others. We will move through, actually select the script and move through some of the others, see if we can see anything that is interesting. We're going to get to, that's an interesting script there. We've got 7 blank lines in front of it. I don't know if it was on purpose or what, but we'll just cycle through. There's a heavy doc block. There's an interesting thing. I like this right here. This stands out as a very strong call out that we have right here, where you are using the equal sign in conjunction with putting a note in between that. Now, there are the 2 formats that you can use. You can obviously use this, and then I could have this above that. Let's go ahead and emulate this. We will get that and this rid. Let's see if I can, no, I'm going to jump to the end of my, well, let's do this. The jumping that I'm doing, by the way, is with the Option key and the arrows in order to get rid of that text without having to use my mouse in order to highlight. But if we were to have to compare these 2 methods of documenting a comment, let's say this is going to be a comment of what is coming up in the script. All right, so the difference here is you get to save a line with this, with that line right there integrated into the divider itself. You get a little bit more of a benefit of some compact code. In my opinion, this actually reads better than this necessarily right here, and it really depends on what you're documenting within the actual script. And we can see that that's done right here as well down at the bottom. I like that. The inconsistency that we're going to find right here is the number of equal signs that is used on either side of that. So my preference would be, if you're going to use this particular format, would be to use a keyboard, a text expander on your platform, Macintosh or Windows, that allows you to basically expand out a fixed number of whatever you're using as your divider line, whether it's the dash or the equal sign, and that way just having it be balanced on either side. That's probably just my neuroses wanting it to be all specific. Also, one of the things that is actually quite interesting when it comes to comments, I worked in the with Drupal. I actually still work with the Drupal content management system. And one of the things that they do is they have these, it's not so much a, I forget what it's called. You put it into the editor, what is the FAR PHP? I don't know. It basically looks at your code as you're coding and then draws attention with little warning symbols, what have you, that you are not following the standards that are defined by the language that's actually being used. And one of the standards that they use is that comments will read like proper, whatever language you're working in. So this actually would become remove any wrapping quotes with a period right there, so that it reads like the language that you're actually reading. If you take the time to add your periods to something that is truly a sentence, that actually can make your code a lot more readable. And believe it or not, as you're reading stuff and you process, because your brain has been trained, that period actually helps out. Now, when it comes to some dividers or very short lines, that's really going to be preferential of whether you want to use a remove tabs. You could put a period on that, but if it really isn't a sentence, it doesn't need it. It doesn't bother me if it's not there. You'll also know, you'll see that whenever it comes to comment, I really do like that space afterwards, so that when you hit the next comment, it makes it readable. Yes, it increases the scroll distance on your scripts, but it actually does make the code a lot easier to read. Let's close that, not save that. I don't know why I'm not saving them. I have all of these example scripts or these files. By the way, this little item right here is being added by the MBS plugin because it is detecting the URL in the comment. This is a nice little feature. There are so many things that Claris could steal and just implement from Christian's MBS plugin. But again, a very heavy doc block here, and we'll take a look at that. All right, I think we have covered this one a fair amount. But let's get right there. All right. This is going to be a good jumping off place for multiple parameters or documenting your parameters. And we're going to get to that ultimate script that we see right here, where in this script, we've got the purpose, something common that I've seen on every script. Parameters and returns. These actually become important when you have a complex script that's doing a lot more than just one simple thing. And that is what we're going to be taking a look at when we head to the final script. So let's see if we can find out some other things, just a little bit more that we can pick up from one of the other files. All right, so there's two files that I haven't gone through. We'll see if we can pick up a few more things about that. That is the CRM solution, which was created by iSolutions, and we're going to take a look at Wheatbix, Daniel's file right now. We'll open up the scripting workspace, see if we can learn anything from it as we cycle through. Now, the first thing that I notice is I like how concise Daniel's purpose and items are. All of that really heavy doc block is absolutely not needed on super simple scripts, and we will be seeing some of those as we come up into the remainder of this video. One of the things that I don't like is the ragged edge on the use of the divider. Let's see if we can find something else, and I will clean that up. Here's an interesting thing as well. As we cycle through the scripts, I get to the third listed script here, and we can see that Michael Lane from Gearbox is actually using the same thing that we had from Mr. Watson here in terms of emulating a block comment. This also is reminiscent of, I happen to know that Michael works, I believe, with Laravel, a PHP framework that is very heavily in terms of using the PHP documentation that it uses. We can see that there is history here. History is really useful when you're working with another developer on a solution, or multiple developers work on a complex solution. That history can give insight, especially if you've got scripts calling other scripts, etc. But whether you need the full doc block is just going to be dependent on the script. We can also see that we have an indication right here of the underscore, which hasn't been used, or we haven't seen in this video thus far. Now, I do not like this lowercase setting, and I believe I already mentioned it. Make your comments read like comments. Capitalize your first letter and add that period. If I didn't say it, I believe I did, talking about when I worked with Drupal, how they did that. And again, here, it's this is very disconcerting and hard for me to jump from reading all of this code, which reads with proper case. Then we get to this right here, and I just need that to read like that. And hopefully on screen, you can see that as I change this, it just becomes that much easier to read visually. If you stop, look at it on screen, and you can see close in and out. Get that close and out. Done like so. Cancel that. We'll close that without saving. See if we pick up anything else. Daniel's is going to be pretty consistent across the board with all of his comments. Oh, and again, his comments, when it comes to using this, I happen to know that he's probably using tabs, and we can see right there as is indicated we're using tabs. If you were going to do that, this particular method of using that dash, I would bypass the tabs and I would just space this out using spaces. And the unfortunate downside of using spaces is the fact that you have to go in and literally hit however many spaces there needs to be in order to get it so that everything lines up like we have right there. But if you really are intent on this particular documentation style, then of course that's what's going to be of benefit, is having that spaced out. We don't have an extension like you have in other code editors where you can obviously tell it space and align all of these equal signs or dash arrows in PHP or whatever the language is. Here in FileMaker, we just can't do that. Multi-line comments, I like to see definitely spaces around those as well. All right, so let's switch over to, we'll close the workspace there. We'll switch over to the CRM solution, which this is something that I happen to work. I'll bring this on screen. If you were ever interested in why the Apex Blue theme has the styles the way that it is set, that is because it was designed for this particular solution. You can find all of these at templates.fm. The templates were created by iSolutions. That was for FileMaker at the time. No, it was probably still Claris. They had switched to Claris, but Claris never released them. So if you're looking for a good representation of the theme, you can do that. But we are here to look at the scripts. So we will look at the scripts and just see if we can garner anything from here. Nothing we haven't seen in terms of a doc block so far. It's a very tight doc block. I like that. It just has the purpose. Again, a common theme across all scripts that we've seen in this video. There, right there on that one, I would probably just limit this down to 3 steps. The purpose plus the comment, then the space, then the exit application. No need on something that small to literally have that. Although these solutions were created so that new FileMaker developers would have the documentation they need. Now, again, if you're going to do this much of documentation, I am going to space that out. Because even what a developer gets without the syntax highlighting that I have here through MBS, that comment does stand out differently because of FileMaker's script workspace preferences and the syntax coloring that FileMaker itself natively applies of a comment versus a script flow. So that is something that I would put in this particular solution. Again, the only thing this is missing on its comments would be its period, and then that would be it. So let's take a look at the final solution, what we're looking at. A lot of these scripts, you note that the scripts just start off with doing something. They start off with having code. That is absolutely perfectly fine when your script is going to be super simple. But as you start to get to the point where you've got a complex script that is going to handle multiple inputs and possibly sending one or more outputs, a return value, then we want to be aware of that. And we want to also know that as a solution grows, we are going to have a situation where we want to know whether or not something goes wrong with our inbound parameters. So let's take a look at our final solution and talk about how it breaks down and why that is probably a better way to script. All right, so let's go through some of the things that you can do that might make your script even that much better in terms of readability, functionality, etc. As I sit here on the documentation, now this particular, what I mean by documentation, we're talking about everything we've been talking about in this script. This particular script in this file, the very first script in most any solution that I create is actually the version number. And that's so immediately when I go into the solution and open the scripting workspace, I can see what the version is, allowing me from one file to another to check which one is a more recent version. I'm many times duplicating a file. Knowing that the script name itself is the exit result of this particular script, that I can call this from another file that links to this file and know what version each file is, because that's what it returns. And in this case, I'm also setting it into a global variable, meaning letting the solution itself be able to reference what version a file is itself by simply doing the script name. Now, in this case, I probably should have done this instead, taken this variable, because if I ever wanted to modify it, and that would be my result right there. That way, this is only declared once into that, and that is also used as the return result, which is the same thing as what I had before, just a little bit better practice. So when it comes to documentation, purpose, common across everything, returns, something that I like to see if you are going to use an exit script. If your script will return something, make sure and declare what your return is up at the very top of the script. Parameters. I'm actually not personally using that anymore because I had to maintain it in two places. I had to maintain it here in terms of the documentation. I wasn't using automated documentation building because I wasn't doing that much on solutions, and I reserved that for the script itself. Context. FileMaker is a very heavy a solution is based on context. If you don't know what context is, you'll need to do some further watching of some videos over on the magazine site or here on YouTube, wherever you can, in order to learn what this applies to. But from the standpoint of a script, knowing what context a script should work within is helpful once you've got a much larger solution, or the organization of your scripts itself should lend themselves to context. And what I mean by that is you will typically have a folder that has the same name as a layout, and that layout will only have those scripts within that folder, meaning those scripts are differentiated versus other scripts that can be used on multiple layouts, which would be either common or shared. Called from, this is useful if you're going to call it from multiple places. Otherwise, if it pretty much is a button, many times you can put the name in the script itself of it's tied to a button. Author, this is for us for ego. Notes, this is helpful for follow-on developers. History is useful if you've got multiple developers. And another one that you might see is dependencies. Dependencies. I hope I got that right. Right there. Now, whether or not you use this on multiple lines, or whether you use it on a single line, I tend to be doing a single line in order to keep my documentation block much smaller, because this ended up using a lot of nones, a lot of nulls, and was just extraneous. But here is something you should do if you want to be a good script writer. In this, I have a changelog, I have a readme, I have a startup, and many times I will end up creating a script which is developer. I also might have a script called, and it's just typing it off screen, sandbox, and then another one that I'll end up having is docs right there. Now, docs will end up having URLs that I can, it's an open URL step actually. So open URL. So anytime I'm working with another language, whatever it is, or another system, if it's HTTPS, I don't know if this is developer.quickbooks.com. I don't know if that's an actual developer URL, but essentially this doc script allows you to just come in here, click your run, and it opens all of your documentation whenever you go out and come back into the solution. So super helpful. But what we want to do on our script itself is, regardless of whether you want that super heavy documentation block or whether you want a lightweight documentation block, that purpose becomes critical. So looking at this ultimate, or what I can't say it is the ultimate, this is just what I've landed on in terms of what I've been using lately. Super lightweight. Purpose with the description. But once your description starts to include notes, create a new item of notes. Returns. This particular script, if it does have an exit step down at the bottom as a result that this script returns something, then I'm going to put the return type and whatever value or values it's returning, because that is very useful to know when I immediately come into the script. Note, I will not put, or I have not been putting parameters for the exact reason that I suggested is I can see the parameters within my code, which we're going to have coming up here shortly. I don't need to edit this in two places unless you're extracting documentation from your scripts. Emoji. Use emoji in order to indicate or offset visually as you're scanning what's going on. This little pin with an important note can be helpful because as you're scanning the code, this red is really going to stand out. Now, it's going to be different on a Windows machine as opposed to a Macintosh, but the emoji are very helpful. This I tend to include as the comment port or in all of my scripts because I can always select it and remove it if I want it, but to go in and have to add it after the fact on hundreds of different scripts, not something that I prefer to do. So I tend to default with these using my boilerplate script code. Parameters and defaults are declared first. When you're writing a script, the same thing in many other languages. I've written in Python, I've written PHP, I've written JavaScript, Java, Groovy Code, Bash scripting, AppleScript. Parameter declaration is the first thing that you do at the beginning of your script. It's what lets you know what in the remainder of the script is going to be used. So the very first thing, this isn't absolutely required because FileMaker itself will instantiate a variable within code itself, and that's what I'm doing right here. This logical step that says if let parameters equal get script parameters, and at the same time check whether or not those inbound parameters are valid, all happens within that one line of code within the conditional if block. If that doesn't happen, in other words, I need to be able to rely on my parameters coming into my script and them being validly structured. Now, not necessarily valid to the logic of the script, but at least they evaluate validly. So with multiple parameters, I am going to declare my parameters and check that my parameters are valid on that same line of code, making this redundant. But for the purpose of the fact that I am using the MBS plugin, and the MBS plugin does a really good job of actually showing you, if I delete this and get rid of it, do I have that turned on here? Let's switch over to this script. Don't save, come back. I don't believe I have it turned on. The MBS plugin, if you reference a variable that has not been previously declared, will actually show a little red text over at the side. So that is actually something that I do, is I just am in the habit of declaring my variable, even if it's going to be empty, knowing that it's going to be used. Now, having said that, what we have here is this whole logical portion, everything that is covered within this section of parameters and defaults is going to all be included at the top of any complex script that I'm writing because it encapsulates the whole portion of the script where all parameters and defaults are set. Meaning this opening if and this closing if sets off everything that I want the script to do with regards to handling parameters. Then I know that if everything coming into the script is going to be valid, as the check is right there, I get to bypass all that. Visually, I can jump from here down to here and just go right to the main script, the functionality of my script, because I know that recurringly this is all going to handle everything that needs to be coming inbound. In that, we have parameters. That's where you're going to have a number of parameters. In this case, there's 5 of them that I just added. Let's go down to 4 right there. So I can read the name of the parameter. I will oftentimes use a block document style in order to indicate what the type is. So if I'm expecting JSON coming in, there's JSON. If I'm expecting text or string, now whether or not you use text, let's look at the comparison between them. versus string is going to be up to you. Text is the word that FileMaker uses for a string-based parameter. If you have worked in enough other languages where all the rest of those other languages do not use the word text, they use the word string, then use the word string. And that's what I tend to use in my own solutions is string versus number as opposed to text. But if you prefer, use text. But we can see right here, name of the parameter, type of the parameter, and then we can see what it's actually getting. And in most cases, when you're using JSON, it's going to be a JSON get element, just pulling the element off. Now, if it differs in terms of the value that's used here versus what's used within the script, that's up to you. It's always a good idea to just stay consistent because it makes the scripts infinitely easier to manage and deal with. After your parameters, many, many, many times you have, sorry about the extra zoom there, defaults. Those defaults mean that when a parameter comes in, if this, let's set this as a different value. We'll set this one as, say, something like target right here. Target. So if target could be empty coming in, then what we're going to do many times is have a default. And so we are going to have a target default. You will see target here as the parameter, then you will see a default right here. Now in the past, one of the things that I've done is I've typically set my default on my parameter acquisition. That didn't make for as easy. The code embedded within here becomes a little bit more obscure. So having a separate defaults area allows me to then blank this part out as in terms of distinguishing this. And I can basically say if, let's get into the actual calculation engine and do a proper default. So a proper default would look like this. If, no, it would be, yeah, I could do an if, and our test would be is empty target, then what we're going to do is have our default value. So that right there is a default. So let's say an inbound parameter comes into your script. It's validated, whether all the parameters are valid. You capture each of your parameters, which is a simple list, easy to read. You can see the type. Then you can set your default right here. And an if statement without the third portion of the if statement simply means that it would be empty itself. So you sometimes will or will not have that value. But in this case, we're saying if the target came in and the target was empty, then you're going to set it to this default value, meaning the rest of my script is going to successfully run. After that, you have this section called validation. Now, don't confuse that with the JSON is valid. In this case, we're validating that the inbound parameters meet the structure requirements. In this case, they are the structure of JSON. This validation says, are the parameters that I have the way that I need them? And this is where most of your parameters are valid. You can do this within one variable, or maybe you use multiple variables. It really depends on the script, but I'm going to have a validation right here that allows me to read that. Then what we're going to do is we are going to have a error handling section right here, which is basically this and this. So basically everything right there. If when the parameters come in, if they don't meet my requirements in terms of what the script requires, or they were actually bad, meaning that they didn't come in as JSON, I use a dedicated script out of all of my error handling. Now, this is different than general error handling. Your script error handling is, as the script is getting through doing things, if it doesn't do something it's supposed to do, you handle that error. Lots of videos on the magazine website. But in this case, I want a dedicated script called parameter error that if any given script that has multiple parameters coming in does fail, I can rely on the fact that that one script I can call as a parameter error. And of course, there's no point in continuing your script if you get a parameter error. Whether you're validating your parameters or whether it's just coming in as bad JSON. Either way, we are going to exit and bail out of this script. This I have found to be consistently something that you always find in most scripts that become more complex. you want these sections: parameter declaration, defaults if they're going to be set, global and local. We can see that we've got a global default right there as well. Whether you use globals and sprinkle them across your solution, that's a debate for another time. Validation is the third step, and then error handling that validation and getting out. Otherwise, when we come into the script, all of that, if I trust it, can be bypassed, and I can go right to my main script and the functionality using a nice little icon in terms of what is going on. And of course, the little gear helps me out right there. Visually, I come in, skip the gear, go right to the main function of that, unless I'm actually dealing with adjusting the inbound, the input and the output of the script. But these are just some of the, there's many other ways that you can write a script in FileMaker. There's many other ways that you can document a script in FileMaker. What you do is up to you, obviously. The biggest point is be consistent and provide some type of documentation. Say what the intent of the script is. At least at a bare minimum, have one line at the top. As we saw at the very beginning, even if that one line does not include a label, at least have the one line saying what this script is going to do. If you're going to have additional pieces of information, of course, the label is going to help out. So use that label, use emoji, make callouts, make icons, make your script flow work well. And if you're going to use this particular method, copy this code, and then in your scripts, create a script over here called snippets. And if you have a lot of recurring code, then put your snippet right there and identify it as such. We'll go over to our parameters first. We'll copy this. We'll go back to our snippets. We'll put this up at the very beginning. I'll use my comment right there. And then I will duplicate that and pull it down here. Use as much white space as is needed right here. And if you want to comment this and say standard record loop, if you have a conventional method that you do something, add some space. It's going to be go to a record request first. We're going to have a loop. We're going to have duplicate that. We're going to exit after first. Next, with the exit after first turned on. If you have a complex loop, this snippet is a dedicated script in your solution that you go to simply in order to select, copy, and then paste and take into your other script. Same thing that I would do right here. Select all of this, copy, go to my other script, paste. Unless you're wanting to be an even more advanced developer and you are going to use if you're on Macintosh, there are Apple scripts that you can use in conjunction with text expansion programs that allow you to simply hit a shortcut sequence of keys, and it puts that block or that group of script steps on the clipboard ready for you to paste into your FileMaker script. Absolutely wonderful way to do your development. So I hope in the course of this video, which was a long one, but I always like to give you, this is the amount of information that I give you, a full understanding that you can find over at FileMakerMagazine.com. If you're serious about being a FileMaker developer, I guarantee you will learn more by watching the videos that I have over at FileMakerMagazine.com. But as always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.